The blood-soaked gauze fell from Lieutenant Commander Raven Thorne's hands as Colonel Martinez held up the grainy reconnaissance photograph. In the sterile white of the field hospital tent, the image seemed to burn with accusation. A tattooed constellation of 7 stars trailing down a woman's left shoulder blade, identical to the one hidden beneath Raven's medical scrubs. The photograph had been recovered from a downed enemy aircraft 3 hours ago, along with targeting coordinates for their base and a single notation in Cyrillic script: Priority Asset Nightingale. For 12 years, Raven had served as both combat medic and helicopter pilot, her dual expertise making her invaluable in evacuation missions behind enemy lines. The small constellation tattoo commemorated her 7 confirmed aerial rescues during the siege of Kandahar, each star representing lives pulled from the jaws of death. Only her squadron knew its meaning. Only her squadron had ever seen it. Yet here it was, captured in perfect detail by enemy surveillance, marking her as a high-value target in a war that had just become devastatingly personal. The tent fell silent except for the rhythmic beeping of medical monitors and the distant rumble of transport helicopters. Martinez's weathered face showed no emotion as he studied the photograph, then Raven's pale features. Around them, wounded soldiers continued their quiet struggle for survival, unaware that their angel of mercy might be the reason death had found their hidden sanctuary. Raven's hands trembled imperceptibly as she reached for another roll of bandages, her mind racing through possibilities. The tattoo artist in Kabul had been vetted, cleared, trusted. Her medical records were classified beyond top secret. Her flight logs were compartmentalized across 3 different databases. Someone with intimate knowledge of her service record had betrayed not just her identity, but the lives of every soldier she'd sworn to protect. Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the fortified perimeter, where Blackhawk helicopters sat like sleeping metal predators. Raven had flown countless missions in those aircraft, her call sign, Nightingale, earned through her unique ability to navigate the deadliest extraction zones while simultaneously treating critically wounded passengers. She was surgeon and pilot, guardian angel and avenging fury, the kind of operator that legends were built around. But legends, she was learning, cast shadows that enemies could follow. The photograph crinkled as Martinez set it down beside a patient's chart. His eyes met hers across the treatment table where a young corporal fought for consciousness, shrapnel wounds decorating his chest like abstract art. In that moment, Raven understood that everything she'd built, her reputation, her service record, her carefully constructed life, was about to be tested in ways that would either forge her into something unbreakable or destroy her completely. The war had just declared her its primary target. Captain Alexei Volkov had been tracking the American helicopter pilot known as Nightingale for 18 months, collecting fragments of intelligence like a patient archaeologist reconstructing ancient artifacts. From intercepted radio transmissions during medical evacuations, he'd learned her voice, calm under pressure, speaking in measured medical terminology even as artillery shells bracketed her aircraft. From thermal imaging captures, he'd mapped her flight patterns, noting how she approached landing zones with an almost supernatural ability to avoid surface-to-air missile locks. But it was the debriefing of captured insurgents that had given him the breakthrough he needed. 3 separate prisoners, held in facilities hundreds of miles apart, had mentioned the same detail. The American pilot medic bore distinctive markings on her back, 7 stars arranged like a constellation. One prisoner, a former university student turned reluctant fighter, had been precise enough to sketch the tattoo's exact configuration during his interrogation. The intelligence apparatus of his government had moved with methodical precision. Satellite reconnaissance focused on American medical facilities, using advanced imaging to penetrate canvas and temporary structures. Thermal detection algorithms were calibrated to identify individual heat signatures during moments when personnel might be changing uniforms or receiving medical treatment. It had taken 6 months of patient observation, but eventually their persistence yielded the photograph that now lay on Colonel Martinez's table. Volkov understood the psychological warfare value of his discovery. The Americans placed enormous emphasis on protecting their medical personnel, viewing them as sacred and untouchable. By identifying and targeting their most effective combat medic, he could force them into defensive postures that would compromise their entire operational effectiveness. The Nightingale wasn't just a pilot. She was a symbol of American invincibility, and symbols, when properly shattered, could demoralize entire armies. His own background as a former paramedic made him appreciate the tactical elegance of her dual role. He'd spent 3 years working civilian emergency services in Moscow before joining military intelligence, learning to triage casualties under extreme stress while maintaining operational awareness. The skills required to simultaneously pilot an aircraft and treat critical patients represented a level of multitasking that bordered on superhuman. Eliminating such an asset would create a gap in American capabilities that could take years to fill. The irony wasn't lost on him that he, a man trained to save lives, was now orchestrating the destruction of someone who embodied the same noble calling. But war demanded such contradictions, transforming healers into hunters and forcing angels to fall from grace. From his command post overlooking the valley where the American base lay hidden, Volkov adjusted his binoculars and allowed himself a moment of professional admiration. The Nightingale's reputation was built on more than luck or skill. It represented a form of battlefield poetry, turning desperate evacuations into works of tactical artistry. Soon, he would test whether that artistry could survive when the artist became the target. The morning briefing room buzzed with uncomfortable tension as Major General Patricia Hawthorne spread aerial photographs across the conference table. The images showed blast patterns from yesterday's coordinated attack on 3 separate evacuation sites, each occurring within minutes of Raven's arrival for medical pickups. The precision of the timing suggested enemy forces weren't just monitoring American radio frequencies. They were specifically tracking her individual movements. "Nightingale, your operational profile has been compromised," Hawthorne stated, her voice carrying the weight of command decisions that could preserve or destroy careers. "Intelligence suggests enemy forces have identified you as a high-value target, which transforms every mission into potential ambush scenarios." Raven studied the photographs with clinical detachment, noting how the explosion patterns were designed to disable rather than destroy aircraft. The enemy wanted her alive, which suggested interrogation value beyond simple prisoner exchange. Her medical knowledge included intimate details of American military field procedures, casualty evacuation protocols, and base security arrangements that could prove catastrophic in enemy hands. Colonel Martinez leaned forward, his expression grim. "We're implementing Protocol 7 immediately. You'll be transferred to Ramstein for debriefing and reassignment to non-combat medical duties." The words struck like physical blows. Protocol 7 meant career termination disguised as protective custody, a bureaucratic death sentence that would transform her from operational asset to administrative burden. "Sir, with respect, removing me from flight status won't eliminate the security breach," Raven replied, keeping her voice steady despite the career-ending implications. "Someone provided detailed intelligence about my tattoo, my call sign, and my operational patterns. That source remains active regardless of my location." The general's steel-gray eyes assessed Raven with the calculating gaze of someone accustomed to making decisions that balanced human lives against strategic objectives. 28 years of military service had taught Hawthorne to recognize exceptional operators, and Nightingale represented exactly the kind of irreplaceable asset that wars were won or lost around. Flight Surgeon Commander David Chen entered with updated casualty reports, his expression reflecting the stark mathematics of combat medicine. "General, we've lost 2 evacuation helicopters in the past week, along with their entire medical crews. Current projections indicate our casualty evacuation capabilities are operating at 60% effectiveness, with deteriorating trends. The numbers painted a clear tactical picture. Eliminating Nightingale would achieve exactly what enemy forces intended, degrading American medical support to levels that could influence overall mission success. Raven understood she was witnessing a strategic inflection point where individual sacrifice might be required to preserve collective capability. She straightened in her chair, feeling the weight of her service ribbons against her uniform jacket. "General, request permission to propose an alternative operational approach." Hawthorne's expression didn't change, but she gestured for Raven to continue. In that moment, the entire trajectory of the war seemed balanced on whatever words would follow. The proposal that emerged from Raven's lips would have been considered suicidal by conventional tactical standards, but desperation had a way of making the impossible seem merely improbable. She suggested using herself as bait in an elaborate counterintelligence operation, allowing enemy forces to believe they were tracking her movements while actually feeding them false information designed to expose their surveillance network. "You're proposing to make yourself a walking target," Martinez observed, his tone mixing professional concern with grudging admiration. "Every mission becomes a potential death trap, and we're asking you to voluntarily enter each one." Raven nodded, having already considered the mathematical certainty of eventual capture or death. "Sir, the alternative is allowing enemy forces to systematically destroy our evacuation capabilities, while whoever compromised my identity remains free to continue providing intelligence. This approach gives us the opportunity to identify the source while maintaining operational effectiveness." General Hawthorne studied the tactical maps spread across the conference table, her strategic mind calculating probabilities and acceptable losses. The plan represented classic military gambit, accepting higher immediate risk to achieve longer-term strategic advantage. Success would neutralize the intelligence breach and preserve critical medical capabilities. Failure would result in the loss of their most effective combat medic and likely provide enemy forces with invaluable intelligence. "The psychological pressure alone could break most operators," Chen observed quietly. "Knowing that every mission carries deliberately increased danger, that you're essentially flying into carefully prepared traps, requires a level of mental resilience that's difficult to maintain." The room fell silent as each officer contemplated the human cost of the proposed strategy. Raven felt their collective gaze like physical weight, understanding that she was asking them to approve what amounted to an extended suicide mission disguised as tactical innovation. But in the silence, she could hear the distant sound of helicopters returning from evacuation runs, carrying wounded soldiers whose survival depended on the kind of rapid medical intervention that only she and her team could provide. The mathematics were brutally clear. Her individual risk weighed against dozens of lives that hung in the balance during every delayed or failed evacuation. "I need 48 hours to coordinate with intelligence assets," Hawthorne finally announced. "If we're going to turn you into bait, we need to ensure the trap works both ways." Raven felt a strange mixture of relief and terror as the decision crystallized around them. She had just volunteered to become the most hunted medical officer in theater, transforming her aircraft into a mobile target that enemy forces would pursue with relentless determination. The war was about to become intensely personal. 2 days later, Raven found herself studying the modified U-60 Blackhawk that would serve as both her aircraft and potential tomb for the foreseeable future. The helicopter had been equipped with additional armor plating, electronic countermeasures, and medical equipment configured for rapid patient stabilization during high-threat evacuations. To enemy observers, it would appear identical to standard evacuation aircraft, but the modifications represented the difference between surviving an ambush and becoming another casualty statistic. Chief Warrant Officer Miguel Santos, her co-pilot for the past 18 months, performed his pre-flight inspection with unusual thoroughness. His calloused hands traced every control surface and mechanical connection, with the focused attention of someone who understood their survival depended on absolute mechanical reliability. Santos had flown with Raven through some of the most dangerous missions in theater, developing the kind of intuitive coordination that allowed them to navigate combat zones while she simultaneously treated critical patients. "You know this is insane, right?" Santos muttered as he checked the tail rotor assembly, his voice barely audible over the background noise of base operations. "We're basically painting a target on ourselves and asking the enemy to take their best shot." Raven secured her medical kit with practiced efficiency, each piece of equipment positioned for immediate access during patient treatment. Morphine, plasma expanders, airway management tools, hemostatic agents, the pharmacological arsenal that had kept dozens of soldiers alive long enough to reach definitive medical care. "Miguel, we've been targets since the day we started flying these missions. The only difference now is that we know it." Sergeant First Class Kai Nakamura, their crew chief and door gunner, loaded ammunition into the aircraft's defensive weapons with methodical precision. His background as a former paramedic made him invaluable during evacuations, able to assist with patient care while maintaining tactical awareness of threats. The Hawaiian native had joined Raven's crew specifically because he wanted to serve with the best, and his loyalty had never wavered through countless dangerous missions. "Radio check, Nightingale," came the voice of Captain Lisa Torres from the Tactical Operations Center. Torres served as their primary coordinator, monitoring intelligence feeds and coordinating with ground units to identify evacuation requirements. Her ability to process multiple information streams simultaneously made her invaluable in managing the complex logistics of combat medical operations. "Nightingale reads you 5 by 5, control," Raven responded, settling into the pilot's seat and beginning her instrument checks. The familiar routine of aircraft preparation provided psychological comfort, a ritual of professionalism that helped maintain focus despite the enhanced danger they were voluntarily accepting. The mission profile appeared routine: evacuation of 2 wounded soldiers from a forward observation post that had taken mortar fire during the early morning hours. Intelligence reports suggested light enemy activity in the area, but Raven understood those assessments were now deliberately optimistic, designed to mask the fact that enemy forces were likely positioning themselves for another ambush attempt. As the Black Hawk lifted off, she felt the familiar sensation of leaving solid ground behind and entering the three-dimensional battlefield where split-second decisions determined who lived and who died. The morning sun painted the mountainous terrain in shades of gold and amber as they flew toward what everyone hoped would be a controlled encounter with destiny. Below them, the landscape revealed centuries of conflict carved into stone and earth, a reminder that their current struggle was merely the latest chapter in humanity's endless cycle of violence and healing. Raven's hands moved across the flight controls with unconscious expertise, while her mind calculated medical priorities and tactical contingencies. In 30 minutes, they would reach the landing zone where 2 wounded soldiers waited for salvation. What none of them knew was whether salvation would arrive before the trap closed around them. The radio crackled with the voice of Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb from the forward observation post, his transmission carrying the controlled urgency of someone accustomed to operating under extreme stress. "Nightingale, be advised we have eyes on possible hostile movement approximately 800 meters south of the LZ, recommending approach from the north with rapid extraction." Raven acknowledged the transmission while adjusting their flight path to approach the landing zone from the suggested direction. Through her headset, she could hear the coordinated communications of various military units as they repositioned to provide overwatch and fire support for the evacuation. The level of coordination suggested higher command was taking the enhanced threat level seriously, deploying additional resources to ensure the mission's success. Santos monitored the aircraft's defensive systems while maintaining visual scan of the terrain below. His experience had taught him to recognize the subtle signs that distinguished normal landscape from prepared ambush positions: disturbed earth, unusual shadow patterns, vegetation that appeared artificially arranged. "I'm seeing what might be fighting positions along the ridgeline to our east," he reported, his voice steady but alert. The wounded soldier's conditions, as relayed through medical communications, presented typical combat injuries: shrapnel wounds, possible internal bleeding, and traumatic stress reactions that required immediate stabilization and rapid transport to surgical facilities. Raven mentally prepared her treatment protocols while simultaneously managing the aircraft's approach to a potentially compromised landing zone. Nakamura positioned himself at the crew door, his weapon trained on potential threat areas while medical equipment remained within easy reach. The dual role of providing security and medical assistance required constant tactical awareness, switching between warrior and healer as circumstances demanded. His presence provided Raven with the confidence that patient care could continue even if they came under direct fire. Nightingale Control. Intelligence updates indicate increased enemy communications in your operational area. Recommend maximum alert status and expedited extraction timeline. Tors transmitted, her voice carrying new tension that suggested developing threats beyond their immediate tactical situation. The landing zone appeared ahead, a small clearing surrounded by rocky outcroppings that provided natural concealment, but also offered numerous positions for enemy observation and fire. Raven initiated her descent approach, feeling the familiar sensation of controlled falling that preceded every combat landing. Her instruments showed normal aircraft performance, but her tactical instincts registered dozens of variables that could transform routine evacuation into life-or-death combat. As the Blackhawk settled onto the uneven ground, she could see the two wounded soldiers being moved toward their aircraft by their squad mates. The scene appeared routine, professional, exactly what she'd witnessed hundreds of times before. But something felt different, a subtle wrongness that experienced operators learned to recognize but couldn't always articulate. The first casualty was loaded into the aircraft while Raven began her immediate medical assessment, finding injuries consistent with the reported mortar attack. But as she worked, her peripheral vision caught something that made her blood freeze in her veins. One of the soldiers moving the second casualty wore a watch that reflected sunlight in a pattern that seemed deliberately timed, almost like a signal. The realization struck her with terrible clarity. They weren't just walking into an ambush. They were being guided into it by someone who should have been protecting them. The trap was closing, and betrayal wore a familiar uniform. Raven's training took over as she continued treating the wounded soldier while her mind processed the implications of what she'd observed. The watch's reflection pattern was too regular, too purposeful to be accidental, suggesting coordinated signaling with external observers. Without alerting her crew to the developing situation, she began mentally cataloging everything she could remember about the soldiers at the landing zone, searching for other indicators of potential compromise. The second casualty was loaded into the aircraft, his injuries appearing genuine but less severe than initially reported. As Raven began her medical assessment, she noticed his pupils were reactive and his vital signs stable, inconsistent with the critical condition that had justified emergency evacuation. Her hands continued professional treatment, while her tactical awareness shifted into overdrive, recognizing that they might be transporting an enemy asset disguised as a wounded American soldier. Nightingale Control. Satellite imagery shows multiple heat signatures converging on your position from 3 directions. Recommend immediate departure. Tor's voice carried new urgency as intelligence systems revealed the developing tactical situation. Santos initiated takeoff procedures while Nakamura maintained security watch, unaware that potential threats might already be inside their aircraft. Raven faced an impossible decision: continuing medical treatment for someone who might be an enemy operative, or revealing her suspicions and potentially compromising the counterintelligence operation they were supposed to be conducting. The Black Hawk lifted off with its usual mechanical precision, but the psychological dynamics inside the aircraft had shifted dramatically. Raven found herself performing medical procedures on a patient she couldn't trust, while maintaining the appearance of routine casualty evacuation. Her training as both pilot and medic demanded complete focus on preserving life, but her survival instincts warned that showing too much competence might provide enemy forces with exactly the intelligence they were seeking. Through her headset, she could hear the coordinated communications of friendly forces as they attempted to track and engage the converging enemy units. The scale of the response suggested that multiple intelligence agencies were monitoring the situation, using her mission as an opportunity to gather information about enemy tactical capabilities and communication methods. Patient 2 shows signs of internal bleeding, she announced over the intercom, maintaining medical protocol while carefully observing the supposedly wounded soldier's reactions. His physiological responses seemed inconsistent with someone experiencing significant internal trauma, but she continued treatment to preserve operational security. The flight back to base normally took 35 minutes, but today each minute felt stretched like hours as Raven balanced multiple competing priorities. She had to maintain professional medical care, preserve aircraft safety, protect her crew from potential internal threats, and gather intelligence that might help identify the security breach that had compromised her identity. Below them, the landscape rolled past in waves of brown and green, marked by the geometric patterns that military operations imposed on natural terrain. Roads, checkpoints, communication towers, and fortified positions created a complex map of human conflict overlaid on ancient mountains and valleys. As they approached their base, Raven realized that landing would trigger the next phase of whatever operation was unfolding around them. The wounded soldiers would be transferred to medical facilities where they could receive definitive treatment, or where enemy operatives could gather detailed intelligence about American medical capabilities and base security procedures. The moment of truth was rapidly approaching, and she still didn't know who she could trust. The base hospital appeared ahead, its white medical tents and concrete buildings representing sanctuary for thousands of wounded soldiers who had passed through its facilities. But today, those same structures might harbor the intelligence apparatus that was systematically compromising American operations. Raven initiated her landing approach, while her mind raced through protocols for handling potential security breaches without alerting suspected enemy assets. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the chief trauma surgeon, waited at the landing pad with her medical team, their practiced efficiency evident in how they positioned themselves for rapid patient transfer. Morrison had worked with Raven on countless evacuations, developing the kind of professional trust that made complex medical procedures possible under extreme stress. But trust, Raven was learning, could be weaponized by those who understood its tactical value. "What have we got, Nightingale?" Morrison called out as the aircraft settled onto the landing pad, her voice cutting through rotor wash and engine noise. The routine question carried new weight as Raven prepared to transfer patients whose true identities remained uncertain. "Two casualties from mortar attack on Op Charlie," Raven responded, maintaining standard medical reporting protocols while carefully watching the reactions of everyone around the aircraft. "Patient 1 has multiple shrapnel wounds with suspected internal bleeding. Patient 2 presents with chest trauma and possible concussion." The medical team moved with choreographed precision, transferring both patients to gurneys while maintaining the sterile protocols that prevented infection and contamination. Raven noticed that patient two's eyes remained alert and tracking, observing the medical facility's layout and personnel with a kind of tactical awareness that seemed inconsistent with severe head trauma. As the patients disappeared into the hospital complex, she felt the weight of uncertainty settling around her like fog. Every face in the medical facility could represent ally or enemy. Every routine procedure might be gathering intelligence that would eventually be used against American forces. The paranoia was professionally necessary, but psychologically exhausting, transforming colleagues into potential threats and routine interactions into security assessments. Colonel Martinez appeared at her elbow, his expression unreadable as they watched the medical team disappear through the hospital entrance. "Debrief in 20 minutes," he said quietly, his words carrying implications that extended far beyond routine mission reporting. Santos and Nakamura began post-flight procedures with unusual attention to detail, their normal banter replaced by focused concentration that suggested they'd also sensed something unusual about their passengers. Professional military personnel developed instincts about such things, learning to recognize when situations deviated from established patterns, even when they couldn't articulate exactly what felt wrong. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the base as Raven walked toward the debriefing facility, her medical bag feeling heavier than usual despite containing the same equipment she'd carried on hundreds of previous missions. Behind her, the Black Hawk sat like a metal monument to the complex moral calculations that combat operations required, machine designed for healing that operated in an environment dedicated to destruction. In 3 hours, she would learn whether their carefully orchestrated counterintelligence operation had succeeded in identifying the security breach, or whether they had inadvertently provided enemy forces with exactly the information they needed to destroy American medical capabilities throughout the theater. The debriefing room contained technology that seemed borrowed from science fiction: digital displays showing real-time intelligence feeds, secure communication systems linking multiple agencies, and analysis software that could process vast amounts of data to identify patterns invisible to human observation. Major General Hawthorne presided over the session with the focused intensity of someone conducting surgery on classified information. Patient two's identity has been confirmed as Corporal Michael Rodriguez, 3rd Infantry Division, currently listed as missing in action following enemy contact 72 hours ago. Intelligence Officer Captain Sarah Kim announced, her words carrying the precision of someone accustomed to dealing with life-and-death information. However, his physical condition and behavioral patterns suggest possible compromise during captivity. The implications struck Raven like physical blows as she realized they might have transported an American soldier who had been turned by enemy forces, either through coercion, psychological manipulation, or threats against family members. The moral complexity of the situation defied easy categorization. Rodriguez remained an American soldier, but his loyalty might have been compromised by circumstances beyond his control. Surveillance of Rodriguez's medical treatment has revealed attempts to photograph facility layouts, medical equipment configurations, and security procedures. Kim continued, displaying captured images on the main screen. His behavior patterns suggest intelligence gathering rather than normal patient responses to medical treatment. Colonel Martinez leaned forward, his weathered features reflecting the weight of command decisions that balanced individual lives against collective security. "What's our assessment of patient one's authenticity?" Sergeant James Mitchell, verified identity, genuine injuries consistent with reported combat action, Kim replied. His presence appears to be coincidental rather than part of coordinated enemy operation, though we're continuing surveillance as precautionary measure. Raven felt a mixture of relief and horror as the briefing continued. Relief that one of her patients was genuinely wounded American soldier who deserved the best medical care they could provide. Horror that the other represented the kind of psychological warfare that targeted the fundamental trust relationships that made military operations possible. General Hawthorne studied the intelligence displays with the calculating gaze of someone who had spent 3 decades learning to see beyond surface appearances. The enemy's willingness to sacrifice a compromised asset suggests they're confident in their intelligence regarding Nightingale's identity and operational patterns. This indicates our counterintelligence operation may have revealed more than we initially intended. The room fell silent as everyone processed the implications. Their carefully planned attempt to identify security breaches might have inadvertently confirmed enemy suspicions about Raven's importance to American medical operations. Instead of exposing the intelligence leak, they might have validated enemy targeting priorities and provided additional information about American medical capabilities. "Ma'am, request permission to continue operational status," Raven said, her voice steady despite the psychological pressure of knowing that enemy forces were actively studying her operational patterns. "If we suspend medical evacuations now, we essentially give them exactly what they want without requiring them to engage in direct combat." Hawthorne's expression revealed nothing as she considered the tactical mathematics that would determine not just Raven's fate, but the effectiveness of American medical support throughout the theater of operations. The decision would reshape everything that followed. The intelligence analysis that emerged over the following week painted a disturbing picture of systematic enemy surveillance that extended far beyond Raven's individual operations. Intercepted communications revealed coordinated observation of multiple American medical facilities, detailed studies of casualty evacuation procedures, and sophisticated psychological profiles of key medical personnel throughout the theater. Captain Volkov's operation had evolved from targeting a single high-value asset into comprehensive intelligence gathering that threatened the entire foundation of American medical support. His success in identifying Nightingale had provided enemy forces with insights into American operational patterns, security procedures, and tactical vulnerabilities that could influence the broader strategic balance. The enemy has been using Rodriguez as a collection platform for approximately 18 months. Intelligence Officer Kim reported during the expanded briefing that included representatives from multiple agencies. His medical records show a pattern of minor injuries that required evacuation, each incident providing opportunities to observe American medical procedures and facility configurations. The revelation transformed their understanding of the entire operational environment. What they had interpreted as random enemy success in targeting medical operations was actually the result of systematic intelligence collection conducted over an extended period. Rodriguez's apparent capture and return was simply the culmination of a long-term operation designed to penetrate American medical security. General Hawthorne reviewed classified assessments from theater commanders, each report painting increasingly grim pictures of degraded medical support capabilities. Casualty evacuation times had increased by 40% over the past 6 months, directly correlating with enemy improvements in targeting medical aircraft and facilities. American soldiers were dying from treatable injuries because enemy forces had learned to disrupt the medical chain that connected battlefield wounds to surgical intervention. "We're facing strategic defeat in the medical domain," Hawthorne announced, her words carrying the weight of professional assessment unclouded by political considerations. "Enemy forces have achieved comprehensive intelligence regarding our medical operations, allowing them to systematically degrade our casualty care capabilities without engaging in direct military confrontation." Raven studied the tactical displays showing enemy positions and movement patterns, recognizing the sophisticated coordination that Volkov's operation represented. The Russian intelligence officer had demonstrated the kind of strategic thinking that transformed individual tactical successes into operational advantages, using medical intelligence to achieve effects that conventional military operations had failed to accomplish. The choice facing American commanders was stark: accept continuing degradation of medical capabilities, or implement operational changes radical enough to restore tactical balance. Both options carried significant risks and uncertain outcomes, but maintaining the status quo guaranteed eventual strategic failure in one of warfare's most critical domains. "Ma'am, I have a proposal that might address our current tactical disadvantage," Raven said, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had spent months thinking through alternatives to conventional approaches. What she proposed would require courage that bordered on recklessness, but desperate circumstances often demanded solutions that peacetime logic would reject as impossible. Raven's proposal emerged from weeks of studying enemy tactical patterns and recognizing that conventional defensive measures would never overcome the intelligence advantages that Volkov had systematically developed. Instead of continuing reactive responses to enemy initiatives, she suggested implementing an aggressive counterintelligence operation that would use American medical capabilities as bait for a comprehensive trap designed to neutralize enemy surveillance networks. "We create a false medical emergency that requires large-scale evacuation operations," she explained, using digital displays to illustrate the tactical concept. "Enemy forces will position themselves to observe and disrupt the operation, providing us with opportunities to identify their surveillance assets and communication methods." The plan required coordinating multiple elements: simulated casualties, decoy medical facilities, electronic warfare assets, and special operations forces positioned to capture or eliminate enemy intelligence operatives when they revealed themselves. Success would depend on enemy forces believing the medical emergency was genuine, which meant accepting significant risks to maintain operational security. Colonel Martinez studied the tactical implications with the focused attention of someone who understood that military deception required balancing multiple competing variables. The enemy has demonstrated sophisticated intelligence capabilities. They'll likely recognize deception unless we commit substantial resources to making the operation appear authentic. "Sir, that's exactly what I'm proposing," Raven replied. "We use real medical personnel, actual aircraft, and genuine facilities. The only deception is the nature of the emergency that triggers the large-scale response."